So Ronda Rousey completely shut down and destroyed a feminist question about the gender pay gap in sports. And she has been surprisingly consistent on this topic, as I covered in this video many months ago. She's been actually pretty consistent on that. Well, recently a feminist asked her the same question again about the pay gap in sports between men and women. And do you think it's unfair and blah, 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 blah. Well, Ronda Rousey shut her ass down. Let's watch.
Just another quick one about Angela's question on equality just before. We've got quite a large pay dispute happening with our Australian women's soccer team at the moment. Is it frustrating for you as someone who's so prominent in your sport? And we heard you say on the Ellen show the other day...
Pause. Did you hear the booing? Did you hear the angry booing emanating from the crowd? And, you know, Ronda started to smirk a little bit because she's like, okay, people are pretty angry about this question. People are tired of these fucking stupid feminist fantasies, man. They are tired of women having exclusivity over the right to complain. And I don't think men should start becoming a bunch of fucking whiners. I don't think anybody should be whiners. But the reason that feminism has been so particularly destructive and toxic is because it presumes that women are the only one who go through hardships, or that women are so much more disproportionately oppressed and suffer so much more than men, and it's given exclusive right to women to complain and say that they're oppressed. And when you presume that women are oppressed by men, institutional manliness, i.e. the patriarchy, then it gives women the right to fuck over men. And men, because part of the masculine role is to not whine, is to rise up and face adversity, men don't want to complain because it'll make them seem like weaklings. And again, I don't think anybody should be a fucking whiner. You shouldn't make excuses in life. It's good to be empowered. It's good to not believe you're a victim. But the reason that feminism is so toxic is because women were given exclusive rights to complain under the presumption that men are default oppressors. And man, you could hear that crowd. People are so tired of hearing women complain about how they're oppressed. Meanwhile, men work the majority of grueling infrastructure jobs, constructing buildings and houses from the ground up and skyscrapers. 90+% of workplace accidents and deaths happen to men. The vast majority of suicides are men. Men are exclusively drafted to fight and die in war. But women are oppressed. Let's keep rolling.
You are the richest fighter in UFC, that sort of thing is still going on?
She is the richest fighter in the UFC. Isn't that interesting? So, hey, feminist question lady, is it oppression, or does Ronda Rousey just work her ass off? Now, I think Ronda Rousey's fame and appeal is a little bit inflated because we live in a neutered world that worships women disproportionately and unnecessarily. People are obsessed with the idea. People naturally like the idea of an underdog story. But because we live in a world that really likes to see women become empowered by emulating masculine traits, as if that's empowerment to tell women that it's shameful to be feminine, and that the only way to have value is to emulate what men traditionally do, emulate traditionally masculine traits. Ronda Rousey represents not only the underdog tale of rising up through adversity, but she's a woman. And then people particularly like that combination under the presumption that women are oppressed. Under the presumption, the feminist presumption that women are oppressed, Ronda Rousey is particularly enticing and appealing to the majority of people, which is why I believe she's so popular. People naturally like an underdog tale, but in this feminist age that we live in, not only is Ronda Rousey an underdog tale, but she's a female underdog tale. She's the female woman who had to rise up against adversity, who had to rise up against all odds stacked against her because, you know, women are perceived as being weaker than men and that men have an inherent advantage. And yet here she is, top of her game in the female section anyways. And people just like the idea of a strong, independent, empowered woman. And of course, as I've said before, it doesn't seem to me like it's pro-woman to basically shame women for being feminine submissive. even though that's what a lot of women like to do. They like to be feminine submissive. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey exists for a reason. It's a worldwide phenomenon for a reason. Women like the idea of being a feminine submissive woman to a masculine assertive man. So that's, I think, part of the reason. That's just a little side note about why I think Ronda Rousey is so successful today. It's not because she's the best fighter. She obviously isn't. Most men in the MMA, even in her own weight class, would absolutely destroy her. No question about it. And she herself has, well, at least her mom has said that, Ronda Rousey's mom has said that it's not an equal match for a man to fight a woman, even if they're both 135 pounds, because of inherent biological differences. So Ronda Rousey clearly is not the best fighter in terms of capable of winning fights against men. She would get destroyed, but again, part of the reason she's so successful is because the appeal she brings as a person, as a character. Let's keep rolling. Let's see what Ronda Rousey's response is to the pay gap.
I think that how much you get paid should have something to do with how much money you bring in. I'm the highest paid fighter, not because Dina and Lorenzo wanted to do something nice for the ladies. They do it because I bring in the highest numbers. They do it because I make them the most money. And I think that the money that they make should be proportionate to the money that they bring in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called a meritocracy. This is what I believe in 100%. I don't care what your skin color is. I don't care what your gender is. I'm not a black supremacist. I'm not a male supremacist. I'm not a white supremacist. I'm not a female supremacist. I'm a merit supremacist. I believe in the meritocracy. If you're capable of doing something, if you prove your worth through skill and empirical capacities, then you deserve to be rewarded as such. Ronda Rousey, in this day and age where people worship women under feminism, and they worship the idea of an independent, empowered woman. Of course, again, like I said before, I don't think it's empowerment to tell women they can only be strong and valuable if they emulate men and traditionally masculine traits. To me, being pro-woman means, well, it's really about being pro-individual and giving individuals the freedom to do whatever they want. But again, the meritocracy is that if Ronda Rousey can bring in the most money, if she can make the most money, sell the most tickets, then by simple mathematics, she deserves to be paid the most. Just because she is clearly, when it comes to the business of UFC, the most profitable fighter in terms of bringing in money for the UFC. So she should absolutely be paid more. It simply makes sense. Of course, again, I would say that her appeal in this modern time is artificially inflated because we live in a world that likes to see independent, empowered women. I mean, I've said this like 3 times, but it's such an important point. I got to say it again. They want to see independent, empowered women, and to the point where they'll deny the fact that there are absolutely more skillful and strong fighters in the UFC who could destroy Ronda Rousey, even in her own weight class. Yet for some reason, even though those men are clearly more successful fighters in terms of winning fights and empirically being able to beat Ronda Rousey, they are not getting paid as much. In other words, if UFC is a sport of who can win the most fights, and Ronda Rousey cannot compete against most male fighters, even in her own weight class, then that means that in the sport of UFC, in the sport of winning fights, Ronda Rousey is not the best fighter. Yet she gets paid more. Why is that? You'd think in the game of UFC, of fighting and winning fights, if there are countless other men who could destroy Ronda Rousey, you'd think that that would mean that they would get paid more. But again, there is always more to a fighter than just their empirical skill in the octagon, in the cage, in the ring. And there is a celebrity status that boosts a lot of fighters forward. And Ronda Rousey, that's certainly the case. And it goes back to my previous point that people always like an underdog tale, but in this feminist age, the kind of underdog tale people really like to hear is of a oppressed woman rising up against the odds and becoming an independent, empowered woman. Again, as I said a million times already, but I have to reiterate this point. To me, it's not really empowerment or caring about women to say that they have to emulate men, traditionally masculine traits, in order to be valuable, in order to be successful. That seems pretty anti-woman to me. But Ronda Rousey has been surprisingly consistent on the issue of the pay gap, as I've covered in past videos. and that's good for her, and I acknowledge that. Also, by the way, guys, if you want, check me out on Patreon. It allows you guys to support my work directly. If you enjoy my videos, if you like what I do, you can pitch in any amount you want, and you support my videos and help ensure that they stay here in the future. Check out my Patreon page in the link below. Later.
That's not very traditional, and I think that a man should really pay for the first date.
Fuck that. We're splitting the bill.